Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast at Genesis Communications Network in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. If you'd like to call us, we'll pay for the call, 866-582-9933, 866-582-9933. Guineith Isaacs is with us today, live in Australia. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
Very, very, very well, Guineith. I just wanted to make an announcement. So tomorrow it's Ricky, and Friday Kathy is our domestic engineer is going to be talking about money-saving tips for the home, and that's hour number one. Hour number two, it's tips from the book, my book, unwritten, unfinished, unorganized, unpublished, and not available for sale. David in Illinois called me, and he wanted to let our class know that the Combat series, the 1960s series with Vic Morrow and Rick Jason, absolutely brilliant series, ran for 5 seasons. It's all available on YouTube, so you can watch it on YouTube. And they also have a documentary that is on combat on YouTube. So I suggest if you'd like to watch it, it is brilliant. It shows you the horrors of war. It shows you the interpersonal relationships. It shows you the moral dilemmas of war. And the reason that I've assigned this as homework is I think, from my perspective, you should see what it was like so you will know alternatives to your situations that you may find yourself in as we go down the drain. There are stories about, I can't believe it, some people are saying that the president is making up that he had COVID. Well, then he'd be making up that, the White House has become infected and we're almost paralyzed. We haven't released that information yet, but, when you're really sick, you don't feel like doing anything. You really don't. And Kellyanne Conway's daughter has said that, leaked out that her mom had tested positive for COVID. There's a war going on in that household. 15-year-old daughter's releasing all kinds of statements via the internet. And her daughter said that the president's illness with COVID-19 is worse than he is letting on. Now, I actually believe that's true. Not because she said it, but because I believed that before I read that she said it. I believe that he's downplaying it. Anyone who's had a respiratory illness knows what it's like. And it's no fun. No matter how you look at it, it's no fun. And that's what COVID is. Shortness of breath. And if you saw the video, you'd see that the president, was short of breath. Unless that video was doctored, and I'm sure that some of the media is saying, oh, it's doctored. And we're living in a world that is just totally bizarre, where it used to be that the news, you could sort of trust the news. I'm talking about the 1950s, sort of trust the news. Now you have no idea. Now you read black versus white. And I'm not talking about people. I'm just talking about the issues. It's hard to figure out yes versus no, on versus off, up versus down, left versus right. It's very hard to figure it out. And that's why it's difficult to make decisions. So if you want to prepare, what you can tell yourself and your family is it better to err on the side of caution or error on the side of no caution? Okay. Is it better to have a little extra food, or is it better to run out of food? It's as simple as that. And so being prepared is having what you need before you need it. Guineith, back to you.
Okay, it's really, really interesting that you talk about that combat series, because that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Except a little bit of a different angle, probably, than what David was talking about. And I don't know if some of the class will even actually like me at the end of the broadcast, because I'm going to really shatter a lot of propaganda programming today with, the truth of how things actually were. And this is truth that I heard firsthand from my husband, Archie, back in the day, of how things actually were. And I've got no reason to, in fact, I'm an honourable person. I won't tell a lie. But, this is it. We're going to be discussing a template for how people can cope with a situation such as what we are facing here in Victoria. And we're going to use the template of Northern Ireland because, and before I go any further, I want to make a really, really strong disclaimer here. What I'm going to be presenting today is history, okay? And I'm going to be presenting how people coped with a tyrannical government in a historical context. I am not advocating that people go and do anything whatsoever, but when you are faced with a situation of tyranny, it helps to know what people have done in similar situations before. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Yeah, it happens over and over and over again. But yes, let's proceed, please.
Okay. Now, there is another, it started out as a TV miniseries. It was initially played over about 2 or 3 nights back in the day, but it has been edited into a single video, and it's been put up on YouTube, and it's a novel that was made into a TV series, miniseries called Harry's Game. And I think that is about the best representation, fictional, but Gerald Seymour really did his research when he wrote the book Harry's Game, which later on got turned into a TV miniseries. And I've read the book. The book is probably still available on Amazon. I haven't checked, but it probably is. You used to be able to pick it up any time in any secondhand bookshop, but it seems to have vanished for some reason. I don't know why. Whatever. They have been doing a lot of purging of secondhand books here in Victoria and in Australia, incidentally, over the last 20 years. So maybe that has something to do with it, maybe not. But if anyone wants to go onto YouTube, all you need to do is type in Harry's Game. That's AHARRY_S space GAME. And what this does is it tells the tale of an IRA gunman, a sniper, who assassinates a prison, what would you call him? Head prison warden, a man who is in charge of the prison. Okay, it's prison superintendent, not just a warden, of one of the most brutal prisons in all of Northern Ireland called Long Kesh. And just go and watch the documentary and you'll understand a whole lot about how the Irish situation really, really played out. What you had back in the day was you actually had the British allowed some sort of tyrannical government in, okay? And they got into doing things similar to what is happening at the moment here in Victoria. So they were doing, I mean, I've been doing my research the last few days. I've sent you some of the music and some of the videos that I found. But there's a particular song out there, and it's called Kinky Boots. So if you want to have a bit of a fun listen about what things might have, how people comedically responded to the situation. It says, I drove a Saracen through your garden last night. And it talks about how they I came to your door at midnight and I bashed it in and hey, hooray, 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 I'm a British soldier. And, this is them just saying, this is who our enemy is, and we are mocking them. And that was one response that they had. And that song, they just couldn't get rid of it. And it was something where, people were facing things like no-knock raids in the middle of the night, Saracens, which are a type of tank or MRAP vehicle, driving through their front gardens in the middle of the night, or taking out the front of their houses, and these people didn't even necessarily have anything to do with the Irish Republican movement, but maybe they got the wrong address. Maybe they'd only been there for 6 months and the people before them had, been involved. But, this was the sort of thing that was going on a daily basis. And it didn't make the locals have a favourable opinion of the British. And every time an incident like this happened, it deepened the resolve of the locals to fight, which is what happens. When the British found that their city, London, was bombed by the Nazis, did they curl up in a ball and cry and say, the Nazis are they're such horrible people, look what they've done to us, they were going to kill us all, They didn't do that, They didn't sit around and whine about it. They said, we're going to, beat these people. We are going to fight them on the beaches. And Winston Churchill's got a very famous speech that he said at the time. Just destroying innocent people's lives should not make them curl up in a ball and die. It should harden their resolve. They should allow their resolve to be hardened. And by all means, cry for a while. By all means. It's therapeutic. But don't let your emotions stop there. Sooner or later, you have to turn around and decide what you're going to do. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Very well said. Oppression should harden one's resolve. We'll be right back with Guineith Isaacs live in Australia. Talking about history, what has happened in the past, and what's likely to be repeated over and over and over again. Guineith, please continue.
Okay. Now, people, when you're talking about them with regards to the history of the Irish Troubles, they tend to say that, it really started in 1969 or 1970. But I can assure you that's not the case. It never really went away. The Irish people, they had a rather bloody war of independence in 1919, which went over into 1920, and that was called the Easter Rising, or the Irish War of Independence. And this is just the background. And at the end of that, at the end of that war, they eventually got the British to the point where the Irish got the British to the point where the British surrendered. And Winston Churchill personally was sent to Ireland to negotiate the terms of the surrender. So you can win against them if you fight them. But when the terms of the surrender came down that the British were prepared to offer, they wanted the North. They wanted Ulster. They didn't want Donegal, and they didn't want Monaghan, but they wanted the rest of Ulster. And this was the terms of the surrender. And there's another very excellent movie out there called Michael Collins, which I would recommend that anyone who's really interested in researching this topic can go and watch that movie, probably online somewhere. But yeah, what happened was Michael Collins was negotiating with Winston Churchill, of all people, and they negotiated these terms of surrender. And Winston Churchill went back to Britain, and Michael Collins had to face the Irish population with the terms that they had lost Ulster in this peace settlement. And immediately they had another war on their hands because a large portion of the population were not happy to give up a quarter of their country. So immediately after them having a monumental war of independence, which was brutal, probably one of the most brutal wars that Ireland has ever had, they immediately were, had to go and fight a civil war. They had to fight brother against brother and, cousin against cousin, which for close-knit Irish families was monumentally traumatic, especially after that they'd just had a couple of years of war, getting rid of the English. But this is the background of it, okay? And it's all important. Now, eventually, Michael Collins was assassinated, okay? When he was driving around in his own country, which was Cork, his own county, which was Cork. In America, you have states. Counties in Ireland are like states in America. So he was driving around in his own state, being driven around, and they were ambushed, and Michael Collins was assassinated. And it was the first full state burial of the Irish Free State. And all sides came together, and all sides mourned him, and that was more or less the end of the Irish Civil War, because nobody wanted to fight anybody after the great and mighty Michael Collins himself had been killed. But the thing is that this is important for people to realize that this is the background that comes to the troubles that happened in the later part of the 20th century. It never went away. There was always a portion of the Irish population that wanted to keep fighting to win Ulster, and there was another portion of the population that were happy just to let it go. But this is what you've got to realise. And my husband, we're heading into a break, aren't we?
Yeah, we've got about 5 seconds. 5 seconds.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So we'll be right back after the bottom of the hour break. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. She's teaching us history. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. Guineith, I believe one of the points that you were making is that at the end of a war, when the war is declared officially ended, not everyone stops. Not everyone is willing to say, well, okay, that other side killed my parents, my children, my father, my relatives, and they say it's over, so now it's over. Some still want to retaliate. Is that the point that you were making?
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was making. And in Ireland, it split up families. It divided whole clans. Okay, so yeah, it's not just the like in the US, the Habsburgs against the McCloskeys, it got to the point in Ireland where it was the McCloskeys against the McCloskeys. You know, because half of the McCloskeys decided that they were going to, you know, accept the terms, and the other half of the McCloskeys decided that that was no good, and that the terms were treasonous, and that they were going to keep fighting, and that they were going to kill their own clan members, which is something that has never ever happened in the whole of Irish history. You know, clans had never gone to war against themselves. You know, they're like Scottish clans. In fact, that's where the Scottish clans came from, was they actually came from Ireland back in the deep mists of history, and they settled across the Irish Sea in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland. But that's another story entirely. Another thing that I'm saying is that the English think that they're going to beat the Irish. They will never ever beat the Irish. They've got a tar baby on their hands with regards to Northern Ireland, and I can just predict from my knowledge of history that it's all going to blow up again, probably quite imminently and probably quite literally. That's just a psychic feeling that I have. Okay, I don't have any information about anything that might be going on. I don't know anything. That's just my intuition there at work. That I think that the Irish population are being oppressed by the British again in the same way that the Victorian population are being oppressed, using this coronavirus as an excuse. And I think that it's only a matter of time before Northern Ireland literally blows up again. And by the way, I should mention to the class here that one of the topics that I studied when I was at the University of Melbourne, and I was an academic there, a student academic, not on the staff, but I wrote papers on this topic back in the day, academic papers back in the day. So I've researched this topic thoroughly. I have been researching this topic since I was about 18 or 19 years old, when I was in grade 12, year 12, you know, doing my university entrance examinations. And my English teacher, who was a lady by the name of Mrs. O'Donoghue, gave me a book to read called Freedom of the City by Brian Friel, and it was a play about, when I say bloody, I mean full of blood. Bloody Sunday Massacre. Okay? That's the reason why it's called the Bloody Sunday Massacre, was because it was full of blood, where the British Army attended a protest in Derry in Northern Ireland, and they opened fire with live rounds on unarmed protesters, and they killed maybe a couple of dozen people, unarmed protesters. And Ireland's, actually he ended up being Ireland's national poet and playwright, if my memory serves me correctly. He ended up being Ireland's national playwright. He wrote a play about it called Freedom of the City, and you can download the script for this play online. It's quite a well-known play, and that was my introduction to the history of the Troubles. Was my English teacher back in the day. I've been studying, and I was 17 or 18 years old. Actually, I was 18 or 19 years old, and now I'm 45. I've been studying this topic for a while. But what I've come to realize, if there's anybody who lacks sympathy for the native Irish in this situation of the Troubles, they clearly have not studied Irish history, because there's no way that you can study Irish history and not gain a tremendous sympathy for the Irish people in their response. For example, when I was doing my academic research at the University of Melbourne on this topic, I had to listen to a large number of press recordings. And at this time, this was in 1998, the Good Friday Agreement had only been signed in 1996. So this was just a couple of years after this. And there was a particular BBC journalist came out, so not Irish. He came out and he said that he'd done a large number of interviews with members of the Irish Republican Army, and he'd done a large number of interviews with members of the Orange Order and all of the British-aligned groups, which were just as brutal as the IRA was, okay? But nobody ever hears about them. It was a war. There was brutality on all sides. That's how wars go. But he said that when he was talking to the Republicans, the Irish Republicans, he said he sometimes had trouble keeping up with their thought processes. But later on, he would take notes anyway, and later on he would go and he would think about it, and he'd realize they had a jolly good point. But when he was interviewing members of the Orange Order and the other, groups that were aligned with the British, he said he had trouble finding a thought process. And this is what I mean. When I hear that, I think of the Black Lives Matter types in America, for example. If you try and speak with them, you will have trouble finding logic behind their reasoning, behind their, what they have to say, because this is how the conversation will generally go. So tell me, why do you believe in this cause of Black Lives Matter or Antifa? And then they'll go, oh, Black Lives Matter. What, you're saying Black lives don't matter? No, I'm not saying that Black lives don't matter. Of course Black lives matter. But don't all lives matter? And at that point, they will generally just descend into a screeching heat and accuse you of being a Nazi and probably start beating you up. And I've watched so many film clips of that. And when I see that, my mind flashes back to what that BBC reporter said about the Orange Order all those years ago. And he wasn't even Irish. He was British. But he was there, and it was his job to report on the troubles, and later on, he was, I can't remember his name, but he was quite a famous reporter who had been there for some years. But you've got to realize, if you can go back and you can see how people responded to this sort of situation in the past, you'll have templates on the inside of you of how you should respond in the future. And I'm not even talking about with violence. I'm talking about being able to spot people without logic to their arguments, and this sort of thing. So, and how you should respond there, which is, well, this person clearly has not thought about what they believe. Whereas if you talk to somebody who is educated about the Irish situation, they will go back 800 years if they are really, really, really educated. They'll go back all the way to Edward I and what he did with the Irish, of how he sent the Irish in against the Scots in military battles for the Irish deliberately to get shot by, the Scots and slaughtered by the Scots, and then he would deal with, the Scots and the Irish at the same time. Just send them in to slaughter each other. It's not like it was in the Braveheart movie. But this is it. It's about having an understanding of a situation that's going on in your local area and realizing that you're not alone, that your situation's not unique. And when you realize that, a light bulb goes on the inside of you and says, oh, so I'm not the first person in history to face a situation like this, that there's actually other people who have faced situations like this and come out on the other side as the winner. And when you realize that, it actually stops being traumatic. And you find it on the inside of yourself the will to fight and get through this situation and to come out on the other side as being the winner. Does that make sense, Vincent?
Yes, and I have a little anecdotal story about that. So, you mentioned Black Lives Matter, I believe, and I'm in agreement with you that all lives matter. And there was a sign in Springfield, Missouri, on a guy's property, on his fence. The house was hidden from the road. There's this long banner. I mean, probably 3 feet tall, maybe 16 feet long. And it said, Blue Lives Matter, some lives don't. And that infuriated me whenever I saw that. Whenever I passed it, it just made me furious. So yesterday, our son came back to the farm, and he was traveling. And he said, "Hey, Dad, I saw the most horrible thing. I was behind this other driver, well behind him, on a 2-lane road," and he explained where the road was. So it's 1 lane coming, 1 lane going, country road. And there's no passing zone. And this car was in the middle of the road, in front of him. And it ran over a cat. And so my son pulled over to see if he could help the cat. And the cat was gasping for air and died right away. He said it was horrible. And the guy who ran over the cat turned around and came over and looked at my son, looked at the cat. And my son started screaming at this guy. Absolutely screaming at this guy. And he said, "You didn't have to do that. You could have paid attention. You didn't have to speed. You didn't have to drive in the middle of the road. You didn't have to kill this cat. You didn't have to kill the cat." And my son was absolutely right. And I would have done the same thing. I would have done the same thing that my son did. So, here we have Black Lives Matter. Well, let me tell you what. All lives matter, including insects. We'll be right back. I mentioned all lives matter. And there's some really sick people out there. There's a former Clinton campaign spokeswoman, Zara Rahim. And she's quoted, according to Zero Hedge, the quote, "I hope he dies." Speaking of President Donald Trump. Michael Moore said, according to the same source, "That poor virus got sucked into his body and is now trapped there. How can it escape?" He wants to use it as a prop. "My thoughts and prayers, too, are with COVID-19. Kathy Griffin. She's that sick. They call her a
She's
comedian.
the woman who wanted to behead him.
Yeah. She's that sick woman. And she says, quote, "Okay, fine. I'll pray for him and the wife on one condition. Not mild symptoms, and they each go on a ventilator for at least 5 days. That's my best and final." End quote. So there's some really sick people. Chris Rock is quoted as saying, same source, "My heart goes out to COVID." End quote. There are people who are just mean. Just mean. And, as much as I despise the behavior of the former regime, that would be Barry Soetoro and his wife, I never wished that he would die. I never said anything like that. Of course, he was a liar, and he misrepresented the facts, and he did a lot of damage to the country, but I never wished death on him. And frankly, I don't know anyone else who did. But we now have a division in our country, kind of like what you were saying within families. We've never seen this in the United States. This is pretty new, at least in our lifetime. That family members are violently angry with other family members regarding Democrat versus Republican. And what they really need to realize is that regardless of whether they're Democrat or Republican, those in America are Americans. Those in Australia are Australian, etc. And you need to think of your country first. You really should, because that's where you live. I do. I think of America first, but that doesn't mean I have to beat up everybody else. That means, our family first. It's as simple as that. Guineith, do you have any comments about that?
Yeah. These people seem to forget that as soon as, if Donald Trump dies, there's going to be a civil war immediately. Because there's going to be people, excuse me, there's not the coronavirus, I promise. There's going to be people who are going to accuse other people of killing the president. And they are not going to let it go. They're not going to drop it. And that is going to, lead to people going out and killing other people. And that is going to spread to Australia. Because anything that happens in America ends up happening in Australia. But even if it wasn't happening in America, it would still end up happening in Australia. Because you have got the police, they seem to be now singling out, here in Victoria, single woman, pregnant woman, especially single woman, and especially pregnant woman, and especially old people, to bash them up on the streets. And there's one video out there that I think I sent it to you earlier, of the police, and they were bashing a woman up on a public beach, and this woman was in her third trimester of pregnancy, and by the end of this episode, which lasted about 5 minutes or 10 minutes, the woman was bleeding all over the beach. She was bleeding on the beach, and that means that baby probably miscarried. If you beat a woman up in her late second or third trimester and she starts bleeding, that means that she's got an imminent miscarriage coming. And they didn't take her to the hospital. They took her to the police station. And what was this crime that this woman committed? She was sitting on the beach. And she was watching her children swimming in the water on the beach. And it wasn't a fancy beach. This beach was in a working class area. And she had just decided that it was a lovely sunny day and she was going to take her kids down to the beach in her working class area at her local beach, And I know this area. It's called Altona. It's an industrial area. So probably it wasn't a particularly clean beach even, but, whatever. She just wanted to have a good afternoon with her children, and the police came and bashed her up, and now her baby's probably going to miscarry.
Everyone all set? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Guineith, we're talking about history. We're talking about how people just get divided. We're talking about the United States and Australia and other countries, and how we've reached a place and time where the perils are great. You can see the beginnings of the Civil War and the Second American Revolution have already started. Non-stop protests. I can't see it getting any better. I can only see it get worse. And those who wish that the president would succumb to the coronavirus, have they really thought this through? Have they really thought about the fallout that will occur almost immediately as a result of them getting their wishes. And their wishes are sick. Absolutely sick. And we just heard at the top of the hour news that social media is censoring what is being said. Well, they have a right to. They have a right to censor it. You know, when you sign up for one of those social media sites, you agree to the terms and conditions of their site. You agree to that. It's kind of like thinking that you have a right to go into a store without a mask if there's a sign on the store that says you will wear a mask if you come into the store. You don't have a right to violate their policy. You don't. Just like when someone comes into my house, if they think they can smoke here, they can't. They'll be ejected immediately. And who do they think they are anyway? You know, your rights only extend to when they impact and affect other people. Okay? And we need to remember that. We need to remember the golden rule. Do unto others as you would like it be done unto you. But we've forgotten that. Like that moron who ran over that cat, thinking of just himself, not paying attention, speeding, reckless driving, careless driving. People who don't tie their loads down on the back of their pickup trucks. They're just thinking of themselves. Oh, it'll be all right. I don't need to spend time tying that load down. What's the worst that can happen? That ladder will fly off, land through somebody's windshield. Oh, it'll be all right. You don't have a right to injure other people. You don't. And we need to remember that. All across the globe, people are angry at each other, at the system, at the media, at their neighbors, at their family members. I know families who are in conflict because they can't get everyone that is living in the same house to pull their own weight. Hey, can you cut the lawn? Nah, don't feel like it. How about tomorrow? Nah, I don't think so. How did we get to this point? How did we get to the point where people are not willing to, literally do their share? If you have 5 or 6 people in a house, can you take turns vacuuming? Sure. Can you take turns cooking, cleaning? Sure. And that's where we're headed. Actually, we're already there. Young people are moving back. Parents are moving back. Families are going back the way it used to be back during the first Great Depression in the United States, where they cut expenses by living together. But not everybody is willing to help out within that family. And I remember having a conversation with a neighbor who was trying to have some family members pull their own weight. And I said, it's real simple. You sit down at the kitchen table and you write a list of what you want done with, the tasks that need to be done. Cooking, cleaning, all those things. And you say, if you want to live here, sign this. Because this is what you're going to have to do to live in my house. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
Perfect sense. Yeah. Because, households need to be maintained. And, I said, I had a conversation a little while back with my son. And I said, listen, you got to be aware that it says in the Bible that if you won't work, you shouldn't eat. That's just how it is. And it's getting to the situation very quickly all through the West, certainly in Australia and probably in America as well, that those people who will not work to grow their own food won't eat in 6 months' time. And, there's a little saying that I'm very fond of saying lately, So, I'll stand at the door and I'll have a bag of potatoes, for example, or a packet of seeds in my hand. I said, okay, son, well, I'm going out to the garden. I'm going to plant these so that we can eat in 6 months' time. We sort of laugh about it, but it's actually true, and it's actually serious. That's how it is around here, that I'm planting things like courgettes and potatoes and peas and things like that, beans and whatever. And also other things as well, apple trees and plum trees and also cactuses and all manner of plants, so that we can eat in a few months' time. Because if I don't, we probably won't eat in a few months' time. And I'm buying stores from the supermarket as well, like flour and eggs and, pasta, stock powders and things like that. And stashing them as much as I can, because if people don't do that, then one day they're not going to be able to go to the supermarket anymore, okay? And personally, I can see that this whole mask thing is not protecting anyone. It's causing hypoxia, which means a lack of oxygen in the blood, which is sending people crazy. And this is an effect that's been known about for at least the last 50 years and has been written about in medical journals for all that time. But, the day's going to come when I won't be able to go to a supermarket. At the moment I can sometimes, but the day's going to come when I'm not going to be able to do that anymore. So I have another set of resources to call on, which is psychological resources, which is having grown up in a indigenous tribal community where people, they could grow their own vegetables and they could hunt in the forest. And if it came to it that they didn't have any money, they could still survive by growing vegetables and hunting and raising pigs and this sort of thing on their own tribal land. And they would go onto their tribal land and they would build a house on the tribal land, what you in the United States probably would call an Indian reservation. They would go there and they would do that on the tribal land, and as well as that, then they would, when the tribe had a feast, then they would come to this, person who was keeping pigs on tribal land and say, hey, would you be able to provide a pig for the feast? And they'd say, yeah, sure, that's fine. And so then the tribe won, and the local individual pig farmer who was breeding pigs on the tribal land would win, and everybody would win, everybody would be fed, and everybody would be happy. But it was work. And, this tribal pig farmer was not getting any money for raising pigs. He was still living on unemployment checks, but he was keeping his family, and he was keeping quite a proportion of his tribe fed, And then you'd get the guy from who had a job at the bakery would get the old bread and the old pies, and guess where they would go? They'd go into the pig pen. Some of them would go into the pig pen. Some of them would be distributed to the children in the tribe. That's what happened back in the day. I'm talking about like 20 years ago. Okay, that's what would happen. But it's the thing of everybody working together, everybody, not fighting, everybody cooperating to maintain life. That's what you're going to have to do. But you have to realize who the enemy is, okay, and what they do, and that if somebody shows up to your gate in a uniform, they're not your friend, okay, and they should be treated with hostility. That is, I've been given a bad time by the people in suits and uniforms for saying that, but I will continue to say it, that if the people in uniforms show up at your gate, they should be treated with hostility because they're your enemy. and they should not have a comfortable life because they are the oppressor. That's just how it is. And if everybody did that, I think that they would have a lot fewer recruits because, and people say, oh, but yeah, they're just trying to do their job and, where would you be without them? And I'd say, well, listen, as it is at the moment, I am without them because if I did have a problem, I wouldn't feel safe calling them because they might come and, put me in cuffs for reporting a problem. Hey, they've done it before. I've had problems, with people doing criminal activity against me and, tried to go to the police. They did nothing and, then reported it publicly through a particular medium. And the police came along and arrested me for doing that, for reporting a crime. This is what they do. They're not on your side. They're not your friends. And now in Victoria, we've got people, we've got soldiers, Australian Army soldiers deployed against the Australian people here in Victoria. They're not your friends either. They are in treason right there because it is against our Commonwealth of Australia Constitution for the Australian Army to be deployed against the Australian people. That's called treason. Okay? So if they show up at the gate here, they'll be treated with hostility too. Okay? And people might say, oh yeah, but they might kill you. I say, well, I wouldn't want to live in the sort of world that they've got planned anyway, so, they better make sure that they remember to put some bags in the boot. That's all that I've got to say about that one. Maybe for them, maybe for me. But this is where it's coming down to. But it's having the background of having researched things like the troubles in Ireland.
We'll be right back. So in that line of thinking, class, you're on your own. And in terms of if you don't work, you don't eat. Well, there's a story about this farmer, and he was at services on Sunday. And at the end of services, he met with the preacher, and he said, "Preacher, that was a wonderful sermon. Just a wonderful sermon. And by the way, preacher, you got to come see my garden. I've been working all summer long on the garden. It is quite something to see. I really would like it if you'd come see it." So the preacher showed up at the farmer's and place, and they were looking at the garden. And the preacher said, "Wow, just look at those peppers. What wonderful peppers God has made. And what wonderful corn God has brought. And what beautiful tomatoes God has delivered." And the farmer said to the preacher, "Preacher, you should have seen this garden when God was doing it all by himself."
Yeah, that's about the sum of it.
Yeah, that's the way it is around here. It really is. So, if it's kind of a cute little story, but if you really think about it, class, you're going to have to do it yourself. You can't depend on anyone. I mean, heck, I actually thought I had friends, and these are people who have thrown me overboard. And, I'm thankful that I know it now. I'm really thankful that I know it now. And I have a feeling that you're going to find out the same thing, too. And there was a singer by the name of Otis Redding, back, 1960s. And he used to say that he made some money, selling his records. And he used to say, when you have a lot of money, you have a lot of friends. And when the money goes, so do the friends. So think in your life. Are you being used? Are you being used by your friends? Do you have talents that they really appreciate? I mean, can you fix things that they don't know how to fix? Do you have money that they keep asking you for? They keep begging you for? Do you? Is it a two-way street? Or is it just you provide and they take. You know, in the television series Jericho, there was this young boy, and he was kind of dating Stanley, the farmer's sister. And this young guy was totally out of touch with everything. He thought all you had to do was, hey, you don't have to do anything. You just order it from the internet and it just shows up. That's what he thought. Nobody makes it. It just shows up. And he also said that something that was very interesting. He said, well, people just kind of like me for my vibe or vibes. And so what is that? What does that mean? Well, that's the guy who says, I'll tell you what, you know, if you insist, I'll come over and help you eat your barbecue, eat your hot dogs and hamburgers and drink your beer. I mean, you know, I'll be glad to, I'll try to show up and help eat that food. You don't need anybody like that. Believe me, you don't need anybody who is good just for their vibe or vibes. You need people who will lift the other end of that board, help you when you need help, rather than you just help them because they're needy all the time. And there are too many of those people. And not one of them is welcome at my house, nor my farm, nor will I help them. And I mean that. I'm not willing to help people who just have their hand out all the time. And I want you to think about that, class. That's your homework. Who do you know who has his or her hand out all the time? Begging you, asking you, telling you that, you know, you need to help them without returning the favor. Without them keeping score. The friends whom I have left, nobody keeps score. The ones who did keep score threw me overboard, and I'm thankful for it, because I don't have to feed them. Or as our son would say, hey, Dad, more potato chips for us. And that's kind of a... And what he means by that is if we had potato chips, and if we were at the kitchen table, and if we were eating them, they wouldn't be here, so there'd be more potato chips for us. We'll be right back. Gwyneth is with us, live in Australia. Class, remember Vinny saying, got 22s? Got 22s? For months, I've said, got 22s. And I was trying to tell you that if you don't have them, you should get them immediately. And this was in the good old days. Now, they're very hard to get. If you can get them, they're about $10 a box. The same size box for 50 rounds that used to cost me 50 cents when I was, maybe an early teenager. So when you talk about, are you ready? Are you prepared? Well, we've been told that prosperity is right around the corner. There's a V-shaped recovery, whatever that means. That Americans will soon be back to work, get back into the old routine. This would soon pass. Well, it's 8 months. And here's some facts. About 90% of New York City bar and restaurants owners were unable to pay their full rent in the month of August. Retail stores continue to close at a pace that has never been seen before. 780,000, almost 790,000 Americans filed for unemployment claims about a week ago. Overall, Americans, how many? About 60 million have filed claims for unemployment in 2020. 60 million. Now, not everybody works, right? So, of the people who did work and were on the books, 60 million have filed claims for unemployment in 2020. Disney, we reported, and we weren't the only ones to report this, 25% of Disney's layoffs will occur in Florida. How many are being laid off by Disney? 28,000. JCPenney, 15,000. As the holidays approach. Now, this is the time they'd normally be ramping up, hiring more people. Anheuser-Busch, laying off 400 employees. Allstate, 3,800 employees. General Motors, their sales of new vehicles down 10% from a year ago. San Francisco apartment rent has fallen 1/5 compared to a year ago. All of the Regal Cinema theaters in the United States are being shut down. Two airlines, United and American, combined have let 32,000 employees go. And we're fighting each other, right? Within the United States. If you really think that this is going to get better anytime soon, I suggest you re-examine it. I said early on, like in the beginning of the corona panic, that this would happen. I said that I don't believe, and this was a long time ago I said this, like January, that we aren't going to see daylight of getting out of this for 20 years. We've been laughed at. We've been ridiculed. What do you think now? So you can pay attention and you can get what you need right now. And I've been saying this for a long time. Get what you need while you still can get it. We're having trouble getting things. We're having trouble getting parts. Literally, when I call someone on the phone and I say, let me give you an example. We're working on a Chevy pickup truck. And underneath the engine, there are two rods, two braces that are about 2 feet long. We call the Chevy dealer and say, okay, so under the engine, on the frame, attached to the frame, meeting in the middle of the vehicle, right under the engine, there is a brace that goes from the center diagonally out to the side member of the frame. There's two of them. They're about 2 feet long. Can you tell us how much they are and the availability? Guy can't find it. We tell him it's a frame part. It's not an engine part. It's not a transmission part. They can't figure it out. Now this is at the dealership. This is the parts guy. This is not some young kid. This is someone who has been there for quite a while. This kind of thing is going on over and over. Almost every call I make, the person on the other end has no clue what I'm talking about. I can describe it in detail, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to do it. Why is that? Because of the high cost of low wages. The people who are hired don't care. They don't want to learn. It's too much work. The people who are paying them don't want to pay them anymore because the employees don't want to work. It's terrible. And that's why if you want to have your spark plugs changed, it costs $350 or more.
What?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
I'm talking about a big open engine compartment. If you do a search and you say cost to change spark plugs, Chevy Silverado, $1,500. So Chevrolet Silverado, that'd be a pickup truck. 1,500 would be a half-ton size. That's the standard size pickup truck. Not the big one. It's a full-size body, but, light duty. Yeah, $350. Just look it up.
That's amazing.
And it takes me a half hour. And that's because I'm really careful. And I put copper anti-seize compound on a pipe, on the threads of the spark plug. And I tighten them the right amount. And I look at them and I put silicone, dielectric grease on the boots, spark plug boots. And I check everything. And so it takes me a half hour, $350. And on Friday, I'll probably tell you about, how to buy spark plugs for less money and how to get the right ones. And I can buy spark plugs, and they're rebates. I can buy a $4.50 spark plug and get a $3 rebate on it.
Wow.
For each one. So spark plugs can cost me $1.50 a piece. Now, I can't do that forever. There are limits on how many you can buy, and we buy the limit. And I'll probably talk about that on Friday, hour number 2. What I'm saying is you have to learn how to do everything yourself. Let me give you one more example. Let's say you have a faucet. Make it even worse. Let's say you have a shower control knob that is in the wall and it's behind tile. And it starts leaking. And you call the plumber and he goes, oh, geez, they don't make that anymore. So what we'll have to do is put a new control valve in there. And what we'll do is we'll hammer out the tile. We'll chip out the tile. And you have to have a tile guy come back when I'm done, with the plumbing part. And I'll put a new shower control in there. And it'll be about $450. And then call the tile guy and see if he can put those tile pieces together that I just broke. You need to learn how to do it yourself. More importantly, you need to have the parts before that thing starts leaking and before it's discontinued. Because if you're like me and you have an old John Deere tractor and you want to buy hydraulic seals so you can rebuild the hydraulic cylinder for the front end loader, and you call John Deere and they go, well, that's an obsolete part. We don't have that anymore. So now you have a tractor that you can't use, that it'll cost $100,000 to replace because John Deere stopped making the replacement parts. That's where we are today. Chevy, Ford, Chrysler, they all do it. They're all in competition to see who can cheat their customers the fastest and the most. If you look at how much a headlight used to cost 99 cents in the 70s, a headlight today can cost $1,000 because people want these stylish front ends of vehicles. $1,000. A typical one would probably cost, only $200 plus installation, which might be another $150. The light bulbs, you used to be able to buy a headlight, and the headlight had the glass, the lens, the reflector, the whole complete assembly for 99 cents. Now, the bulb may cost you just the part that lights up. Forget the housing, the reflector, the lens, all that. Just the bulb may cost $40 or more.
That's amazing. They used to be like $5 or $10.
Well, and some of them, you have to take the front wheel off, jack up the car, take the front wheel off so that you can take the inner fender liner off so you can get to the darn bulb.
That's ridiculous.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
And so who goes and buys these cars? And people go on the lot and they talk to the dealer's salesperson. Do you think that salesperson has taken a vehicle apart? Do you think that salesperson has gone out in the shop and gotten under cars and looked at them with a mechanic to learn about them? They stand around and drink coffee and eat donuts on the sales floor. That's what they do. They don't know anything about the cars. So you're going to entrust someone with a $30, $40, $50, $60, $70, $80,000 purchase that doesn't know squat about a car? I know. I was in the Mercedes showroom while we were waiting for Mercedes to try to figure out we were stumped with a 500 SL. It would go into limp mode, and we worked on it and we couldn't figure it out. And they said, oh yeah, we're the guys to do it. We know. Our guy's been to Germany. He's trained on this 500 SL. It's a V8 two-seater. And the engine control computer would get goofy. And so they worked on it for 2 hours, and then they told us they couldn't figure it out. And we said, wait a minute, you told us you could figure it out. And they said, well, it'll cost 2 to 3 times what the car is worth to tell you what's wrong with it. Not to fix it, just to tell you what's wrong with it. But during that time, I was in the sales floor, and I watched these sales guys, and they're just looking at each other, laughing and scratching, and so I I went to one of them and I started asking him some questions. I played like I had no clue. I didn't, know much about Mercedes. That's what I led him to believe. I didn't lie to him. I just was, appeared to be pretty dumb. And
Columbo.
that guy the guy who was selling the cars to the unsuspecting buyers who actually thought he knew what he was selling had no clue. No clue. I could have done a better job selling Mercedes just walking in off the parking lot, going into the sales floor. I could have done a better job selling Mercedes than they were doing without being trained at all. That's where we are today. People don't have a clue. We bought a thermostat for a vehicle. Go to the internet, from the big box auto store. It shows the thermostat, the thermostat gasket comes complete. What gets delivered? Thermostat, no gasket. Why? Because nobody checked the box. We'll be right back. So here's some numbers. A lot of people are behind on their utility bills. And just take, for example, Indiana, just one of the 50 states in the United States of America. There are currently more than 112,000 households that are behind 4 months or more on their electric bills. So if you multiply that times 3, you say, okay, so let's say there's 3 people in a household. That's 1/3 people who are at the risk of having their electricity shut off in Indiana right now. Right now. Now, there is an edict by the federal government that you will not shut off the electricity, but that's expiring very soon in lots of states. Right now, there are about 21 states that have disconnection bans in place, meaning you can't shut off the electricity or water. Well, when they expire, then what happens? What if your electricity is shut off? What if your electricity is shut off by mistake? Oh, we didn't mean apartment 504. We meant 404. Sorry. And what if it takes a few days to get through to those guys because they disconnected through their computer network so many meters at the same time? That's it. And why would they do that? Well, because the electric companies have to buy either energy to generate electricity, pay their employees to keep it in distribution, or they pay for the electricity, they buy the electricity from some other generation station or company, and then use their transmission lines. So it's like one of those two. But they have to pay something for the energy that they sell you. And if you can't pay them, they can't pay their suppliers. And their suppliers are going to shut them down. So it's incumbent upon the electric utility companies to keep this whole thing running. And they do that by charging you more than they pay for the electricity. That's what they do. And if you can't pay them, they can't pay the suppliers, and the whole thing comes tumbling down. That's where we are today. That's just one state. One state, 1/3 people. So multiply that times 50. Some numbers are as high as 179 million Americans are potentially at risk of having their utilities shut off. 179 million. That's about 54%. 54% of Americans are at risk of having their power shut off. So if you think everything's great and you're going to be able to buy whatever it is you think you're going to need later, and some of these people have their electricity shut off, do you think they're going to be worried about going back to work when they don't have electricity? What do you think is going to be the most important thing to them? Their survival. That's what's going to be the most important thing. Class, you need to watch Combat, the television series. And as David said, you can watch it on YouTube. You need to watch it because you will see what it is like to live without. The home that you had today might not be there tomorrow for a lot of reasons. We could go to war with China any second at the stroke of a pen or at the push of a button. And by the way, The guy who carries the football for the president with the nuclear launch codes in it, he has COVID. Back to you, Guineith.
Yeah, I was just going to say in Ireland, even into the 1950s and 1960s, after the war that Ireland had with England, England decided that they weren't really willing to trade with Ireland anymore. That's another thing that happens after wars. And that meant that it became very hard in Ireland to get things like tractor parts. And so they had to go back to ploughing their fields with horses. So they went back to that technology just to feed themselves. And when my husband Archie was in Ireland in the 1950s and 1960s, he saw that it was normal for farmers to plough their fields using a team of horses. And this is it. This is what people have to, be aware is coming in a complete systemic collapse. That there's people out there now, if you are lucky, you might have a farm. And if you have a farm, you should get horses, because they will not only be a form of transport, they will be a supply of manure for your garden. And if you have horses and if you have their manure, you will always be able to grow vegetables, and you will be able to feed your chickens, because you can build a manure pile which will get full of maggots, and the maggots will feed the chickens, and then the chickens will make eggs. And then after the manure has finished composting, then you can put it on your garden, and then you can use that to raise vegetables. There's people who can adapt to this lifestyle, who can go back to living in this way, will survive. And it'll be an existence that's full of hard work and probably not much money eventually, but
yeah.
they will...
We're out of time.